Hello and welcome to Swinburne University and our web session this afternoon, A Flying Start, the Future of Aviation. My name's Sally MacArthur. I'm a Professor of Biomedical Engineering and the Director of the Manufacturing Futures Research Institute and CSIRO Research Plus Science Leader in Manufacturing here at Swinburne University of Technology. As someone who seems to normally spend a hell of a lot of her year in aeroplanes and at airports, I'm really excited to join you today to explore how the aviation sector is going to look in the future. But before we start, I just want to, in the spirit of reconciliation, acknowledge that Swinburne acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and the community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples today. So welcome. And today we'll be reviewing a whole range of different topics, as well as giving you the opportunity to ask questions and have those answered. So we'll be exploring the current state of the aviation sector, historical downturns, and the demonstration of how the aviation sector has actually been incredibly resilient over the years. We'll look at the future projections for the industry and where it's going, how these are going to affect the job opportunities in the industry that you may find as graduates, and then we'll talk about the aviation program at Swinburne. We'll get some course information and the opportunity that you will have when you join us here at Swinburne University of Technology. But I have a fantastic expert panel with us today. It's really exciting to introduce you to Dr. Matt Ebertson. Matt is a Senior Lecturer in Aviation at Swinburne and the Aviation Postgraduate Course Director. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Sally.
Mike Drinkle, who is the General Manager and CEO of CAE, Australian Flight Training. It's Australia's largest flight training organisation. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Sally.
John Frierson, who's the Team Leader for Flight Simulation, Certification and Innovation Team at CASA. Hi, John.
Good afternoon, all.
And Captain Matthew Gray, who's a captain in the Boeing 787 type rated examiner and also a new lecturer at Swinburne University of Technology. Hi, Matt.
Hi. Hello, Sally.
So let's crack on. Let's think about how it's going to work today. So today's webinar is going to run for about 45 minutes. The really important thing for you is that you can send through your questions from now. Okay, from the start of the session. Our moderators are standing by to address as many questions as possible live as we go through today. The panel and I will also have time for questions at the end of our discussion, so feel free to ask questions and send them through. We'll group together the ones that most people are asking and have a go at answering those towards the end as well. The last thing that we want to say is that we'd also love to get your feedback on this session. So we'll have 3 polling questions that are going to pop up during our discussion. Feel free to go ahead and answer them as soon as you see them. Okay, so let's look at what's happening in the aviation sector right now. We're all aware of the huge changes that are going on in Australia and globally in the sector. Captain Gray, perhaps you can start by telling us a bit about how you're seeing the sector at the moment.
Thanks, Sally. Well, 2019 was a particularly good year for aviation. There were more pilots needed, more airline staff needed, that we were carrying record numbers of people, and the airline industry was making a lot of money. So airlines were buying new aeroplanes, so things were pretty good. And then all of a sudden it all stopped. So I'm going to give you a bunch of numbers now, and numbers in aviation tend to be somewhat large. So just brace yourself for some large numbers. The total revenue that is calculated that is going to be lost this year because of COVID. This came out of ICAO, something like $380 billion US. So it's a lot of money. We had 26,000 airliners, both narrow-bodied and wide-body airplanes flying last year, of which 17,000 of those airplanes are now parked at airports. If you go to an airport now, instead of being at the terminal, these airplanes will be lined up on the runway looking like a Woolies car park. So there's lots of airplanes that aren't doing anything. Capacity's down globally, internationally by about 60%, and domestically not quite so bad, but about 40%. Cargo is down by about 30%. So you have to remember a lot of passenger aeroplanes carry cargo, so all that stuff underneath, it's not being used. But there is a great demand for cargo now, so it's putting prices up. Instead of 80 cents a kilo, it's about $4 a kilo. And finally, in the USA, which has probably got the largest domestic market along with China, on the 1st of March 2020, they flew 2 million passengers on one day. 1 month later, it was down to 100,000. So they're big numbers. That's what's happening at the moment. But it's not all bad. But they're the numbers currently.
Okay, that's our starting point for today. So Mike, as the head of a training organisation, how has this COVID event, how has that changed how you guys are working as trainers?
Yeah, thanks, Sally. Look, ironically, prior to stage 4 lockdown in Melbourne, we were actually having our busiest time ever in our history. The previous 4 months were extremely busy. Part of that was because of increased numbers of students who are flying, particularly from overseas, out of the China market. And we were busy because we were struggling to retain our flight instructors as well. We were losing a lot of instructors to go to the airline, so recruitment was high. So our actual staff numbers were down a bit. So, we had a bit of a backlog. COVID actually helped us a bit in that sense because our flight instructors were not leaving. And we had more resources to be able to train people. So we're actually very, very busy. Of course, when you're going to stage 4, it's had a big impact now. And now we're, sort of sitting on the ground waiting to be able to fly again. But, we have, with CAE in Melbourne, got over 330 students in our programs waiting to fly. So as soon as we can get back in the air, we'll be off and racing as fast as we can. And we have quite a large number of students waiting to come to Australia from overseas as well. So the immediate future is not too bad from a training point of view, but the longer term future obviously is going to be impacted because of the border closures and COVID globally.
It was always interesting through all of this period watching people just obviously being out and flying in their planes as personal flights as well, which I thought was a fascinating way of looking at the world as well. So Matt Ebertson, how is this, how are you seeing this as an academic, but also as somebody who's obviously really well connected into the sector? How are you seeing the current state of the aviation industry?
Thanks, Elle. Yeah, it's a big change for everybody across the whole industry, but from the academic side of things, it's completely changed how we teach. We've always been very proud of the way we engage with industry at Swinburne. So one of the concerns was in transitioning to an online teaching environment, traditionally a face-to-face teaching environment, how do we preserve that and make sure that we can still connect with industry? And it's been really fascinating. So I think we've all sort of risen to the challenge and found new ways to teach. For instance, I've created a virtual airline this semester, so we're actually trying to give the students the experience of being in an airline and being employed for a semester to make it feel less like a traditional classroom environment. And that sort of thing's happening all over the university. So it's a real spirit of innovation at the moment. I'm not going to say it's not challenging, but the whole idea is to keep the student experience as exciting as it was on campus. And I actually think it's probably helped us to mature what we do as well.
Excellent, excellent. So keeping in mind all of those technology things, John, in your role and as somebody who's really engaged in the technology that's going on in the sector, how is the sector actually responding to the fact that people aren't able to get in the air so easily and the pilots need to be still kept up to speed? Can you tell us a bit about how that's influencing the behaviours at the moment?
Sure, that's a very good question. The mere fact that we're having this meeting on Zoom now, not in an auditorium at Swinburne, tells us a lot of what the industry's doing. Things like online instruction at a distance, things like keeping pilots in the loop with learning modules that can be sent to their home, things that we're doing like online inspection of simulators from a distance where it's safe to do so. A lot of things that are in place now that once wouldn't have been thought of, and they include the use of new technologies, because just in the same way that we all know now what Zoom is and once didn't, we will be in a very short period of time looking at the role of virtual reality, artificial intelligence, augmented reality in the training regimes for all pilots. So a lot of things were going to be happening anyway, and this has given an added impetus. But from the point of view of keeping pilots on the roster, even when they're not flying, CASA, I know, and this is all publicly available, has done a lot to lengthen out the time for instrument ratings and things like that to support industry getting back up to speed again. So we have a very close liaison with industry on how we can be ready to get people back into the air again.
That's always good, because I would really like to be traveling and not have the situation where the pilots aren't able to fly because they haven't kept up to speed with their training. So Matt, also, I know that you're a big fan of the Microsoft platforms for flight simulations. How have you been keeping up to speed with that?
This is where I reveal my true inner geekiness, and that well, clearly I have the new simulator platform, but actually my PhD student and I did an online PhD tutorial session where we joint flew an aeroplane across the Atlantic in real time. So that was I mean, it's just one of the examples. It sounds a bit trivial, but actually it's just one of the examples of embedding technology into what you do in teaching, just trying to find new ways of doing things that are as entertaining as and true about aviation as they are educational at the same time.
Excellent, excellent. So it's not new that the aviation sector goes through peaks and troughs, shall we say. I can think of any number of events, having lived in America right through the 9/11 period where there were no planes in the air, and that's going to be a rude shock for everybody. But Matt Gray, you've been a pilot for some time now. I think it's 40 years, maybe?
I was going to say 45, but I'll take 40.
Okay, we'll go with 40. That seems fair. It's a rounder number. But can you tell us a bit about the downturns and the resilience of the sector? What sort of things have you seen over that period of being in the aviation sector?
Well, I've been flying airplanes since I was about 15 years old, and when I joined the airlines in 1988, within 1 year there was the pilots' dispute, and I'd never seen anything like this because I came out of the Air Force. But it's safe to say that about every 5 to 7 years, there will be some sort of problem that hits aviation. Now, I've seen the 89 pilots dispute, 9/11, the GFC, SARS, various terrorist events, all these sorts of things. So I'd have to say that uncertainty is normal and disruptive events are very normal. So we see this current event being the biggest, but it is still normal. And I've seen a lot of it. It's unsettling, but there are methodologies and ways and means of being able to manage that uncertainty, but it's very regular.
So does, in the fact that it's actually really regular, Matt, how does that actually, Matt Evertson, sorry, I should say I've got two Matts, for those who hadn't noticed. Matt Evertson, in terms of the fact that it is actually really regular, how does that get built into training people to cope with those types of things? And what do we do as educators?
Yeah, it's part of the aviation. I think we build aviation people, and part of that is being able to cope with change and uncertainty. One of the skills you're building is how do I cope when everything suddenly changes in front of me? So for example, in the unit I'm running at the moment, we do just that. We make it very dynamic. We drip feed information across the course of the unit and then change things at the last minute and expect people. So you're not just handing in a written assignment, you're actually trying to solve a real world problem and deal with the fact that the world changes around you. And that's one of the qualities that's really important for an aviation person, that and being able to deal with high risk environments and under time pressure as well, and can keep your cool head in those environments and know when to look.
Absolutely. Okay. So Mike, when you think about it from having been with CAE for quite some time now as well, how does that play out? How do these downturns and that sort of resilience in the sector show out for you?
Yeah, so it's interesting because aviation does go in cycles, and aviation training goes in cycles as well, but our cycles, we're a little bit out of cycle with the mainstream. If you're going to be training to become a pilot or training to become an aircraft maintenance engineer, I mean, that doesn't happen overnight. So, you know, it's a 3 to 5 year program to become qualified. Now, aviation tends to bounce back very quickly, and they want their, you know, they might not need pilots now, but they want them very quickly when it bounces back. And unfortunately, with the supply line sort of stopped now with people entering the ab initio or the early stages of their training, yeah, we can't produce those new pilots or aircraft engineers so quickly. So, you know, we need people to be coming into the industry now, even though it seems a little bit counterintuitive. You know, why would you enter an industry now that's really not operating? But in 2 to 3 years' time, when the industry is bouncing back and there's a high demand for pilots, we need to have those trainees in the pipeline ready to go. So our challenge is to almost predict a little bit about how the cycle is going to go. And of course, then we have the challenge of trying to get people interested in this as a career again, in a time which is really, not looking really great globally. So it goes in cycles, and our cycle is just a little bit out of tune. So we have that challenge as well.
Yes, of course. So, John, when you think about the resilience of the aviation sector, how much does technology or changes in that environment sort of affect the resilience or enable the resilience of the sector?
I think the technology supports the resilience in that it's continually, year over year, providing productivity improvements for aeroplanes. It's getting ever cheaper to fly. And the same with training devices. It's getting ever cheaper to keep people up with training. It won't be a long time before pilots will be able to do more of their training from home. But even the fact that in the last 30, 40 years, we've moved away from aircraft training in big jets into simulators is the sort of resilience that brings us able to bring economics to bear. In other words, we can do more training for less dollars. And when we need to get pilots up to speed again, we're not tramping everyone down to Avalon to burn holes in the sky in big jets anymore. We can do it in simulators with 6 slots of 4-hour sessions a day.
Yeah, that's really exciting, the way that the technology moves with us as we move through. And I think we'll come to this a little bit later, but I think it also creates all these fascinating opportunities for employment and for new technologies to be influenced. So for those of you who are really interested in both technology and both being a pilot, there's some really exciting ways of thinking about it. So Matt, as we start to look at coming out of COVID, and as we start to look at changes in the sector, Matt Evertson, can you tell us a bit about how you think our travel strategies might change? Do we think that there's going to be a change towards more business, or how is that going to affect the sector?
It's a really interesting question. I don't think anybody's got the answer to that at the moment. I think all we know is there is probably going to be some sort of change. But I think identifying the fact that we all, like, as you open the session, we all want to travel. We all like traveling. It's one of the freedoms that's being given to us. And why the world is expanding. I mean, we need to meet the environmental challenges of that along the way too. But I suspect there'll be a change in what we do in terms of business. Possibly a shift in the sort of the balance of business travellers to economy travellers on aeroplanes. But I don't think it's going to be as dramatic as many people are predicting. I mean, I realise we're having this meeting via Zoom at the moment, but having spent the last 8 months in meetings online, there is something about being in front of people and being able to have those conversations with them in a business sense that's really important. So I think for certain functions, we will get back to travelling.
It takes a lot of face-to-face time to actually build the relationship to be able to then go online in a lot of cases, doesn't it?
Yeah, so there will be a shift, but I think we've seen the value of what that face-to-face time can provide to us and what the aviation industry is really doing. And moving forwards as well, we see aviation playing an actual key role in beating COVID. We've seen reports recently in the logistics operation that's going to be required to distribute a vaccine around the world when it happens. I mean, we know that aviation is important to us because we all feel the fact that we're not flying. So I think that's pretty profound.
Yes, as somebody who comes from a biomedical engineering background, the ability to move things around the place in cold chain so that you've got a very tight control over the temperature of the vaccine. You don't want your vaccine turning up hot. It's very hard to put that on a ship. I've got to say, it's really got to be flown, and we're going to need it faster than we could get it on any other form of transport as well. And keeping up that supply chain and connecting supply chains between countries, I think it's a really important part of aviation. I know that the amount of cargo that and I've seen some footage of large planes being converted over to all cargo. I think I saw a A380 converted over. How much play do you think that's going to influence in where the aviation sector goes for the next little while anyway? Matt Evertson?
Up to me?
Yes, to you. I'm going to ask you. And then I'll let Matt Gray go too.
I'm sure the other Matt's got some opinions on this as well. But yeah, no, it's an interesting place. I mean, we've just seen the first Airbus A321 passenger to freighter converted airliner come into operation. So I think surely there's going to be a change in the value of aeroplanes on the market. There's a whole glut of aeroplanes which were being used for passenger transport now being available for freight conversions. And I'd imagine we'd see probably new airlines forming, new operations forming, probably some operations disappearing and changing what they do. We've already seen that. But I think that's the exciting part about it, really. It's dynamic, it is all changing. And so in order to provide that change, we're not just talking about the pilots flying the aeroplanes here, but everybody that's planning the business logistics, everybody that's building these new businesses and planning how they're going to work, they are aviation people. And that's also what the skills that we're training here at Swinburne are very much in demand.
So Captain Gray, we will come to you now. How are you seeing this play out in terms of, the changes in the types of things that will happen in the future in the industry?
Look, aviation's always had the ability to adapt, overcome and improvise, and they'll do it exactly the same way. It will be probably airlines may well go down the path of having a high proportion of cargo operations in their business, and they can convert their current airliners relatively simply to cargo aeroplanes, and you might find that that will be something that the international arm of airlines, perhaps like Qantas, will do, and they will target those sorts of things. There's also the possibility too that airlines will probably look for more fuel efficient aeroplanes, and it may well be that they get rid of some of their aircraft like 4-engine aeroplanes, which are not quite as fuel efficient as the new big twins, and there may well be a rush towards new aeroplanes like 777 and 350s, 787s and things like that. So there will be a drive to do things differently. I suspect there will probably be other ways, such as behavioural changes. If COVID is still around, aviation will still be here, but it may well be that we have to adopt some other policies on an aeroplane to prevent the spread of COVID. So airlines have had a very good track record of being adaptive, and I see behavioural and technology changes and perhaps new airplane types as a response.
Excellent. So, Mike, that comes back to you. When we're changing airplane types like this, how does that affect you as a training industry, and how do you look forward to actually thinking about that as well?
Yeah, look, I think we all get excited about new technology, and certainly in the training world, we have to take that into account. But from our business, what we're doing is we're giving people the basic skills. It's starting out ab initio training. So our training devices have to be very grounded. We need a certain amount of technology in there that replicates what's in the airline, but we can't, have all the technology, all the bells and whistles. Because I mean, whilst commercial jet airliners might be quite modern, pilots go into general aviation as well. They might be flying older types of aircraft, particularly say in the freighter world. In different parts of the world, the aircraft are not, the latest technology. They're older. So, there's always a bit of a balance there. So we have to be providing those base core skills to get ready for an aviation career in commercial aviation, airlines, general aviation. And we also have to look at that technology for the future as well, because eventually the graduates, the people who are getting their licenses, will face this technology. It wasn't that long ago that we had analog aircraft, where we had sort of the old style cockpits. Now it's all computerized. So there is still a lot of analog aircraft out there for training. Are they replicate the airlines? Probably not, but they do replicate a lot of aircraft types which are still out there in the general aviation world. So we've got to be flexible again and look at both worlds, be aware of what's happening in the technology world as well.
And I suppose if you learn the foundations, you're set up well. You've learnt the functions that you need, and you can be adaptable and resilient. Then you're not tying yourself. When the opportunity comes up, you can go into more technology, or you can drop back to low technology as well, which I guess is really important.
Yeah.
Matt,
look, we're using the analogy there a little bit that we're not training people to be Formula One race car drivers. You have to start off at the basics. But in the same case, we're not training people to be heavy truck drivers. You have to start off at the basics. So both are very complex types of equipment and different skill sets, but all very important. But they all come from that same basic core skill set that we're focusing on at the very start of a person's training.
And that's also then about building up that aptitude to respond and be resilient in those environments as well, isn't it, to a large extent?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And now, no more now than now. We have, as I said, over 300 students sitting on the ground for the last, 3 months almost, and probably another 2 months or 6 or 7 weeks to go. So they have to be resilient just personally there too, particularly our international students that are here from overseas without a lot of family or support networks here. some of these students would have been, home by now. We have one student in particular who's only got half an hour left to go on their training course, and they would have gone back to Malaysia. So it does get frustrating, but they have to be very resilient.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, John, when you think about the sorts of things that are being either introduced, or we're using the opportunity at the moment to think about how new technologies will be incorporated into the aviation sector, are there things that are coming through at the moment that will change the way the industry would work, or that you think are going to adapt maybe how the industry works coming through this?
Well, a couple of areas. The first, Matt just mentioned before, the replacement of 4-engine aircraft. As I mentioned earlier, I think perhaps 25 or 30 years ago, the idea that long-range routes would be the province of big twin-engine jets was a dream. Perhaps more than that, about 35 years ago. But now it's the norm.
Yeah.
35 years ago, the idea that you wouldn't have Avalon full of big jets doing circles in the sky would have been a dream. Now we have simulators that can manage that. We have increasing at the level of devices used in the training regimes for ab initio work up to instrument rating level. We're working flat out to get approval methods and standards to allow there to be devices to make up for the significant decline in the number of navigation aids and training aerodromes in Australia. We're working very hard to produce the world-class standards to allow trainees to get the training they need without both the cost and, secondly, at a much improved safety level.
Okay. And so, Matt Evertson, one of the things we've spoken a lot on the pilot aspects of flying, but obviously the aviation industry goes well beyond being a pilot and flying. Can you tell us a bit about how the management side of the degree actually, well, the management skills that you learn, and how the management of the aviation sector is changing in response as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we touched on it earlier when we were talking about some of the generic skills of an aviation person that are required. This ability to be resilient, this ability to adapt to change, and that's true of people on the flight deck and people in the management side of the world as well. I was very fortunate to, about a year ago, spend several months going around the country speaking to lots and lots of aviation organisations about what they're looking for in future people in this industry. And at the very core of that were actually the technical skills. Were sort of, okay, that's going to be a given. You're going to learn to fly an aeroplane. You're going to learn to manage a system. We want you to have those communication skills. We want everybody to appreciate everybody else's job. So the sorts of roles that management students might go into are equally as demanding and pressing in terms of time pressures. They're working in a network operations center. It's like the NASA mission control for the airline. We're looking after not just one MAC grade, not just one pilot, but hundreds of them in the air at the same time, all across the world, and making sure that very complex, spinning plates all of the time, making sure that very complex operation stays together. And actually, I think they probably got the harder job. You're looking after many, many, many elements. And it works in real time, and things change on you as well all of the time. An aeroplane will be grounded somewhere, or your passenger will go missing, or a cabin crew member will be sick, and you'll have to recover from that and stay on the road. So it's a bit like the same basic soft set of skills that we're training the flying people, we're also training the management people to be able to bring into their work on the ground. So it's the most amazing thing for me is how tightly integrated that is. I'm talking to Matt sometimes, it's about how closely those people on the ground work with the people in the air in order to keep the operation going. And they do both need to know each other's jobs inside out, really.
So it's a really exciting opportunity to be part of the sector and to really be engaged in the broader sense of what's going to shape the sector as well. Actually forming what the airlines are going to be doing and what the aviation sector is going to look like. That's really exciting. So, Captain Gray, you've been a pilot for, as you say, 45 years, but through that experience, you haven't always just been, and when I say just, I don't mean just, you haven't always been just about being a pilot. You've done lots of other tasks within the airline industry. Could you tell us a bit about that journey that you've been on and why you chose to do those types of things?
Thanks, Sally. Look, it's probably one of the core things of my aviation career. I decided very early on that because aviation is uncertain from time to time, a pilot can lose their medical you need, as a pilot or anyone who works in aviation, you need a plan B, a C and a D. So I thought, well, what happens if I can't do this job that I really want to do? What will I do instead? So what I decided to do, my basic philosophy was, if the company offers me any job that they will pay for to qualify me in something else, I will take it. So I became a trainer, an instructor, an examiner, but I also became a management pilot as well. And I've held every operational management role in an airline, from chief pilot to head of training, fleet manager, audit manager, which gave me a great deal of experience. And as Dr. Evertson just said, I now understand how an airline runs. So I've got that background to be able to do it. So it's a fully integrated experience. So if the worst happened to me, that I was not able to fly with a issue, other things in aviation are vastly transferable, because I've worked in this, it's a unique environment, but the skills are very transferable. So that is why I took all these other roles. And it's now put me in a position towards the end of my aviation career where I've got a number of paths that I could take, because I've managed people, I've managed projects, I've flown aeroplanes, I've trained, I've done all these things. Apart from the fact that it was very interesting as well.
Yeah.
I wanted a great diversity of interest, and that's what it allowed me to do. So they were the things that pushed me along, and I've had a great aviation career. I'd start again tomorrow and do the same thing, despite the current climate we are in.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting, isn't it? To think about, and I think when we talk about careers that people take on now, we're talking about people having 10, 11, 12 careers over their life. Doesn't mean they have to change firm or leave a discipline, but you can pivot within a sector and really explore all the different things that are going on in that sector. So Mike, in terms of the types of things you see graduates from the flying school going into and in the partnership, what's the sort of opportunities that come out of the sort of things that you see? You spoke about instructors a little earlier. Could you tell us a bit more about how that works?
Yeah, look, the flight schools are part of the aviation industry, but we're also part of the supply line, not just for pilots, but we have operation staff. A lot of our people move on and go and take operational jobs in the airlines. People go into quality and safety type roles as well. So, and they're our employees, not our trainees. So, we're training pilots. We've also got the aviation management students. And we're running a business. I'm running an aviation business. I'm not a pilot, and I think a lot of the senior execs in these airlines are not pilots either. They might have come from a logistics background or an engineering background as well. So it's a very diverse industry, and we do get focused a lot on the pilot side of it, and ultimately that's what we see. But I think, as Matt said earlier, there's a massive support network behind to getting those aircraft in the air that keeps the airlines ticking over. I mean, my particular business here, we're producing pilots, but there's so much goes to that to support the instructors as well, to get the aircraft out. We're an aviation business in our own right. So part of our challenge is that our instructors go on and go into the airline, so it opens up jobs for new flight instructors. Just about all of our grade 3 junior instructors are Swinburne students who come through that pathway. They finish their course, undertake a flight instructor rating, then start their career as a flight instructor. Now, those skills are, you're a trainer, you're a teacher, mentor, and the airlines now value that, as Matt Gray would know. I mean, training captains in the airline, flight examiners, etc., are very, very important. And they have to start at the bottom as well. And a lot of them start off as flight instructors, just not pilots.
That's really interesting. So, and I can imagine that, John Frierson, when we come to thinking about the technology development that's required for the sector, what sort of opportunities are there out there for people to actually get into the tech side of things as well, and into building the understanding of the regulatory or the other aspects of the sector that happen as well?
Oh, look, I think as Matt said, if you have that mindset that says whatever's thrown at me, I'll take, even if it's sometimes like trying to drink out of a fire hose, the change is that rapid. If you have that mindset, you will have enormous opportunities. It might be through the Pilots Union, through IFALPA, simply reading the magazines that abound every day and websites, things like that. But taking on board the stuff like pilots who did their own training in preparation for type ratings using Microsoft Flight Simulator, not something that's regulated or planned, but they've simply sat down and said, I've got a few months waiting time. and I'll do it. And our training captains in the world that I lived in then said, what a great result. These guys noticeably are better off. They're better prepared. So if you're prepared, as Matt said, to take on board what's there, there's enormous opportunities. And then inside the airlines themselves, things like the move to category 2, then category 3, 3B, 3C auto landing, an understanding of how all that works, an understanding of all the gizmos on new aeroplanes and how they're working. You know, there's a lot of pilots still flying who were around when GPS was just 3 letters that no one knew what they meant, etc. And I was around when inertial nav first came in,
Yes.
etc. These things happen, and the prizes, both professionally and personally, go to those who take them on board or not, the guys who get ahead of the game.
So I love what I'm hearing about the opportunities to shape and really shape your own adventure, for want of a better term, probably, or choose your own adventure as you go into a career in this domain. But maybe now's the time to actually come back and look at, what does the degree at Swinburne actually look like? What sort of things will you have the opportunity to do? So, Mike, you lead all the pilot training, and you're in our partnership with CAE, everybody does their pilot training with you. Can you tell us a bit about how you focus as an organisation on preparing students for the real world and the types of experiences that students get as part of the degree at Swinburne?
Sure. I mean, the question always comes up, you know, why do I need to do a degree to become a pilot when I can go and get a licence? And I think the big difference is if you have a look in the airlines now, as Matt Gray was saying, it's a management of a business. They are big businesses. So you really need to understand the business. So, you know, the training, our fundamental job is to train them to operate and fly an aircraft. But to do that, they have to understand how to operate safely. You know, understand how to manage fuel, understand the logistics of everything there as well. And it's just not about their tactile skills, being able to physically control the aircraft. They need to understand the aviation law, meteorology, and there's a lot of knowledge and ground theory subjects that go in there as well. So the degree actually also provides the academic side of it, apart from what we call the flight training side of it. Provides that more rounded understanding about not flying a plane, but why are you flying this aircraft and where's this career going to take you? So it actually produces people that have got critical thinking skills. I mean, if you complete your degree, you've demonstrated it, you can actually have that academic and that understanding to do that work, to understand how an airline operates, to understand the laws and various things that go with it. So that you're a lot more than a pilot. You're doing the sort of take the career path that Matt's talking about. If you just want to fly the aircraft, that's fine. The airlines will love you because you'll sit there and you'll fly the aircraft for 40 years. But the airlines need those people to expand into their business as well, because it evolves, it changes, and they need the different thinking skills coming through all the time. And I think that's what the degree provides, just more than just learning how to fly the aircraft itself.
And it really does sound like it comes back to that resilience piece, that also giving you the flexibility of your skills, that say you chose to not stay in the aviation sector at some point, 20 years into this career, you've got loads of other skills that are actually transferable into other sectors as well, which I think is really interesting.
Absolutely. And as I was saying before, our operations people move off into the airlines, but I mean, there's a lot of logistics, a lot of planning, a lot of safety type roles, a lot of quality auditing, fleet, planning, fleet management, engineering. They exist in a lot of other industries just outside of aviation. And I think if you have a look what's happening in the world now in the health sector itself, the health sector is now starting to pick up some of these sort of critical thinking, crew resource management skills, human factors type skills. Our parent company, CAE, is it's the world's largest simulator manufacturer, about 75% of the world market. But the other part of CAE's business is healthcare simulation, a lot of military type work there as well. So they're vastly different industries, but they have a lot of very commonality, a lot of skill sets in there as well.
I'm going to sidetrack slightly to actually mention right now that there's some work that I know that Captain Gray is doing at the moment around looking at how skills of training pilots can translate to training surgeons in robotics and things like that. So that's another way of thinking about it. Dr. Gray, maybe you could tell us a bit about that as well. I just gave you a doctorate too. Well done.
Well, yes, thank you very
much. It's coming.
I'll take it. Yes, the path is long and hard. But look, medicine has long been interested in aviation human factors. I mean, aviation has been doing this at least when I started flying for the airlines 30 years ago, but medicine is behind. But they've now recognised that the complexities of surgery, decision-making, operating with simulators and robotics has a very, very big underpinning of human factors. They use the same things: situational awareness, decision-making, communications and teamwork. And this is where aviation has led the way. So I'm doing some work now with some robotic surgeons in Melbourne, teaching them how to do aviation human factors to improve the outcomes of surgical events. And hopefully it will become part of standard surgical practice. So it's very exciting.
So much to learn, really, isn't it? So, Matt Evertson, if I come back to you to talk about the course in more general terms. So as a student at Swinburne, what are some of the things that you think really differentiate us as a place to come and study aviation, be it management or piloting?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of things. I think we've got that, as I said before, that really close connection with industry. For example, with everybody you can see on the screen at the moment, we've developed really strong links so that we can get our students out and experiencing industry. We're not just talking about it. We go on site visits. At the moment, some of those are a bit tricky, but hopefully they'll come back. And then we synthesize what industry do in the university as well, so that you're not just spending 3 years in an academic holding pattern. You're actually starting to feel what industry is going to be like. But the campuses, I mean, for a flying student, it's an interesting degree anyway, because you'll spend roughly half of your time in a university environment and half of your time at an airfield flying an aeroplane around Victoria, which is a very exciting thing to be doing for a degree, I think. So that's an interesting way. But you're also mixing with lots of different people which are trying to achieve different things in their career and learning from them as well. So it's a rich experience. It's a demanding experience. It's, we ask a lot of our students in terms of the time and the level of performance. We want them to be professionals from day one. But I think that's very rewarding as well, in terms of you really feel like you deserve your place in the industry when you graduate at the end of the degree.
Mm. That's really important. Look, I think we've come to a point where we've got a lot of questions coming in. So let's make sure that we get the opportunity to answer those. So I'm going to swing us across to looking at some of the questions that people have been asking and seeing what everybody thinks. For those of you who are joining in with us today, please make sure that you've got the Q&A function on your screen and make sure it's enabled if you'd like to submit a question and to see what other questions other people have submitted as well. So let's start at the beginning. And actually the first question that came through was regarding the aviation management degree and the rewards of that type of career. And I might just ask Matt Evertson if you can just comment on how that fits into the biggest picture. And the question is sort of, how efficient is an aviation management degree? I'm not quite sure what the efficiency question is, but Matt.
Efficient is the degree.
Yeah.
I'm taking it that's probably in how condensed it is into the teaching program. I think it's very efficient in that there's a lot going on, and it's quite dense learning. So in that respect, yeah, we're packing a lot in. But part of what the university is always doing is constantly reviewing what it teaches and how it teaches. So I'm in the last 8 months pivoting around to completely change our approaches to teaching is just something which we're quite used to doing. And I think that's the exciting part of the future of teaching in this space as well, especially with CAE. We're also researching in the way we teach. And so we've got this opportunity with our partnership with CAE to actually start looking at the way we do train people to enter the management career and the way you train people to enter the flying career. And maybe there are ways we can accelerate that and give a more authentic experience. We're constantly about trying to provide the authenticity. So it's a bit of a rambling answer to it. Yes, I believe it's efficient, but it can always be more efficient, and we're progressing the development of the course.
And I think that interesting thing, the example you gave earlier around, you're running an airline in one of your subjects and things like that. So that ability to actually really put things into context for people is really important too. So a question from Aaron Peckick. Firstly, thank you for all your time today. Airlines like Qantas and Regional Express appear to be much more optimistic about a quicker recovery from COVID-19 pandemic compared to other airlines. For example, British Airways has a much bleaker outlook, saying they have lots of data showing this will be a long recovery process and it does not see a short-term coming back of passengers. I think we might go to Matthew Gray for this one as a starting point. What are your views, and do you think it will bounce back quickly?
I think it'll bounce back in probably 2 stages. You'll start with what we have that's different from BA. We have a very large domestic network for a start.
Yeah.
So once the Australian borders get opened, the domestic network will open up quite quickly, and that's going to lead the charge of recovery for Virgin, Rex, and for Qantas. So we have that in our favour. I'm not sure of what data that British Airways are talking about, because essentially this is new data and the interpretation is open to a great deal of question. So the first will be domestic, and I would think that the market research that all the airlines have done would indicate that there's a reasonable amount of pent-up demand. So I think domestic is going to go quite quickly, and we're still seeing forward sales in the domestic arena, for at least for Qantas, that I'm aware of. International will take a little bit longer to get up and running, but if you've got a business like Qantas, which is underpinned a lot by domestic anyway, that's going to assist the recovery of international. The problem with international is that our 2 big markets of North America and Europe have to be under control first, and bringing those passengers when we bring them back into the country, we need protocols for that. But I won't be surprised if it's quite rapid, and I would suggest if you are in the airline that you would want to be in a position that would allow you to recover very quickly. That means you want your pilots up and running, and we've got programs in place now to keep our pilots current, our aeroplanes properly serviced. There's no point in saying we think the future is bleak and do nothing about it, and all of a sudden the recovery is very fast. Everything in aviation is about timing, and my experience has been it's fast. It's always fast.
John, did you have anything, or Mike, that you wanted to add to that? Any other points you wanted to add?
Yes, Sally, I was just going to say that, as Matt said, if you have a look at the Chinese market, domestic market is almost back up to about 95% where it was. International is still flat, but it's a huge market. So, what impact does that have on Australia? Well, China has still got a shortage of pilots. So from our point of view, about 40% of our international students are from China. So we're seeing demand. So we're a little bit concerned that we're going to come out of this sort of quiet period, then we're going to get flooded because we're going to have so many students that need to come down and start their training. The Australian domestic market will come back, and it'll come back quickly. And then we'll see a lot of pilots starting to get employed, and that will filter through again. So you've got to remember, aviation is a global network, just not in Australia. So we'll follow suit what's going on in the rest of the world.
And there's so many large markets just to the north of us, not just China. When you look at, when you live in a whole set of islands, you need flights, and you need a lot of pilots to service those sort of things in Indonesia and a lot of other countries as well. So Matt Ebertson, this is probably a question for you. How will the COVID pandemic affect the Qantas the QFPP, given that pilots have been made redundant recently? Will the program still go ahead given the demand for pilots?
Obviously I can't give any solid answers on that one. That Qantas will make their decision on what they want to do with that. But I would imagine, like with all of these situations, what we're talking about here is projecting into the future. And you've got to have a system set up which can deal with the demand a few years down the line. And so with systems like the Qantas Proprietary Training Program and other programs as well, they're not looking to switch on and off instantly. They're looking to actually get people in the system. It takes a few years to train them and have them ready in place for when the business recovers again. So I would imagine there's a lot of really serious thinking going behind the scenes as to where do we predict things are going to be, and how many people do we need to be taking in. I'm not saying that doesn't mean there won't be adjustments, but I don't think people will be having knee-jerk reactions in turning off supply pipelines for the industry, because they're very hard to set back up again.
And if we go back to some of what Mike was saying, if there's a boom in the training sector as well, then there's opportunities for people to stay on and become trainers through that period and pick up hours and experience, because I suspect the market is looking for people with experience as well. How does that work, Mike?
Yeah, it's an excellent point. And we were, as I said before, we were losing a lot of our instructors to the airlines, and they were the experienced ones. So that will come back again. And to produce grade 1 flight instructors, we need to have grade 3 starting their career. It'll take 2 to 3 years of that instructor to get through to that stage. Now, so it's probably, if you look at a university student starting next year in 2021, it'll be the end of 2023 before they're finishing their degree and coming out with their license. the aviation industry will be vastly different in 3 years' time. We're hoping it's going to be, on that growth spurt again. But the training world's we're going to have that demand before then, because, we have to plan for this increase in growth. So we'll be employing more instructors. We'll keep them for a while. At our view will be, once aviation picks up again, we'll lose those experienced instructors to airlines, which will create more opportunities for new instructors and new pilots coming through.
It's a lovely process of lifting everybody up and through, isn't it? I like it. It's a great one.
It's also very challenging too, as I said, because that's where the business aspects come in, that we're continually forecasting ahead and trying to work out what's going to happen to 2 to 3 years' time, which is aviation in general. It's a different skill set.
Absolutely. So Matt, we've got a question here, Matt Evertson and Matt Gray, because you both teach on our aviation programs. What are the courses like right now? How are they actually being delivered? Tell us a bit about how things are likely to be if we keep on having to go through these small shutdowns of COVID and things like that. How does that impact what you do?
Yeah, obviously it's my daily concern as to how we're teaching, and I think teaching looks very different at the moment. Well, it doesn't, because for many years now we've actually been trying to transition into what we call a blended mode, where we provide more of a teaching online so the students have got better access. And I think what COVID has done has really accelerated that process for us, and we've all suddenly become very skilled in teaching online and how we do that and inventing new ways to do that. So at the moment, the student experience is wholly online, i.e. we're delivering everything through the internet. I suspect in the future we'll still really value this great campus that we've got on that face-to-face experience. So we'll move to a situation where a lot of information is provided online, and and we still want students to come together and meet each other in industry on campus and use our great campus that way, but we use that time in a much more structured and efficient and valuable way as well. So it's a really great experience, and it's going to be a learning process for the next year or 2 years perhaps, and things will change. But I think that's great. It's innovating what we do in terms of teaching and making it a more enjoyable experience for the students, and certainly stretching the staff as well in terms of how we go about teaching.
Excellent. And John Frearson, in terms of how you see these types of things of changing of courses and changing of the delivery modes for the types of things we're doing, how does that play into the sorts of things that are going on in the technology and the simulation sort of space as well?
They're all interlinked. It's enormous. I sat in my first virtual reality simulator 3 or 4 years ago and was stunned at what it offered. Those sorts of things, and that's just one example that would be common to most people joining in today. And things like the Microsoft entry level, but maximum value devices are staggering. But I was just going to mention one other thing about the university context in terms of the resilience that Captain Gray talked about before. The bulk of the students who go through university background now, especially at a place like Swinburne, are mixing with other cultures, perhaps other subjects they might not have otherwise done. And they are going to learn things that people of my generation learned, like all of a sudden after the pilots dispute in 1989, living in another country, a language not known to you, with people, culture is entirely different to yours. The ability to hit the ground running with that stuff, to know that it's important to learn a different language, a bit of the language of where you are, to study the history of where you are, to understand that the culture in the cockpit wasn't the way you were brought up at home. Those things are extremely important, and that's what the university gives that you aren't going to think.
That's really important, actually. It's that diversity of experiences. And that actually comes into another question that we've got, and I might have a bit of a chat with Captain Gray about this one. Is we've got a student asking, would it be beneficial to do a double degree with a Bachelor of Aviation and a Bachelor of Business, do you think, to broaden even further those skills? How do you think that might fit together?
I never knock back. Not all knowledge is good. If you wish to go and do a double degree, that would be fine. My experience is I did a master's in aviation with some management subjects and a lot of human factors. When you go into an airline, either as a manager or as a pilot, the minimum you probably want is to have an understanding of safety management systems, how airlines operate in terms of their operational procedures and their planning, some of the financials that airlines operate under, which is quite different from other places. So the minimum would be just a straight aviation degree, and that would be enough. You might want to do a double degree, which would be fine, or do what I did and actually get into the industry and then have a focus exactly on what you want to do later on, which is probably my advice, is that a Bachelor of Aviation to start with, and then later on when you decide, because there are many paths you can take inside an airline, and you might find a degree is better suited to one path than the other. So not necessary to do a double. If you choose to do that, that would be good. But the more you know about how an airline operates, the better off you'll be.
Absolutely. So Matt, in terms of the number of students who might do a double degree with the aviation, can you tell us a little bit about the sort of choices that people are making?
Yeah, so we offer the double degree with Bachelor of Business on both sides. And actually, I think one of when you get to see the students that are going through that, they sort of have this innovation entrepreneurship spirit to them. So it's a lot of students which are excited about maybe starting their own airlines in the future or starting their own businesses. So it caters, I think, for those people that maybe have that building spirit to them, and it's a really interesting degree. We also offer the Bachelor of Aviation, Bachelor of Laws as well. So this is probably just building on some of the stuff that John was saying, where obviously aviation is a highly regulated industry, and you need to understand legal speak and the nuances of that. So that degree is very much set up for people that want to aim at the sort of the regulatory environment in aviation.
So my next question is around, as a female, and I work in engineering, so there's never very many women around. Can you tell us a bit about the gender balance in the courses? Maybe Mike, you can tell us a bit about what happens in the piloting side of things, and then we'll get Matt to comment on the rest.
Yeah, look, I think historically, certainly over the last 10 years, we see our domestic intakes around about 10% of each intake is female. It should be 50%. I think there's any doubt about that. And we've been talking about resilience. Well, going into the industry, if you're a female in a technical sort of male-dominated industry, you have to be very resilient too. So, our instructor numbers, we try to hire as many females as we can as well. So we're probably a little bit higher, about 15%. And yes, we're trying to do that. Interestingly, not in China, but with some of the other countries, particularly out of India, much higher numbers of females in the group. We have cadets from AirAsia, from Malaysia, high percentage of females in there as well. Yeah. So it's certainly a great opportunity, I think, for for females to get into what's probably considered a non-traditional industry. Because they do very, very well.
And we do have some really fantastic support networks for the women in STEM sort of domains. I know at Swinburne there's some really great networks for support as well. But Matt, more generally on the management side of things, do we see a difference as well?
We do. I think, and I'll speak frankly, I think sadly it's still not high enough by a long way. And Mike said that we're I mean, this is true for the sort of STEM courses in general. But we're seeing increasing numbers of females present to the course, which is great. I'd obviously like to see more. I'd like to see more females showing up to these sorts of events to show interest in the course, because I think one of the things we need to change is the perception of what the industry is and what the job is. And it's got this, it can have a little bit of an old and fusty, no disrespect to Captain Grey there, but a little bit of an old and fusty kind of image to it. And it's not that, it's a thinking industry. You need to be emotionally intelligent. You need to think about you're working as part of a very close-knit team. So I think readdressing what the career looks like really will hopefully encourage more people from all across the spectrum of diversity to come towards us.
Okay, we've got 1 more minute, and I'm going to ask this question to each of you and ask each of you to answer in turn. We've got somebody who's not sure if they want to study aviation. Do you have any advice for somebody who's sitting on the fence? John Frierson, what would you say?
Get started and then immerse yourself in it and see what you find it.
Excellent. Mike Drinkall?
This question comes up a lot. If you've got the passion, go for it. If you're sitting on the fence, then you've got to look at this as a long-term career. It's not easy, there's a lot of work, but it's a good challenge, but a very rewarding long-term career, as Matt Gray is an example of.
Matt Gray?
I'd do it all again.
Yeah,
absolutely, without any change. I've loved it. I've loved every facet about it. And I remember being in the Air Force and someone said, mate, you'll never be bored a day in your life in aviation. And I never have been. And I'd do it all again.
Excellent. And Matt Evertson?
with regards to the flying program, my normal response to that question is go and jump in an aeroplane and do a trial introductory flight and go and feel it and know what it's like, because you will be hooked. Unfortunately, that's not possible at the moment, so maybe download Microsoft Flight Simulator or get stuck into YouTube and start looking at the fantastic array of videos on YouTube.
But also remember, you don't have to be a pilot. You can be in the aviation sector, which is hugely exciting, without having to be a pilot. So if you are sitting on the fence, think about whether you want to be in the aviation sector or whether you want to be a pilot, and then you can jump one way or the other, and that will give you a lot of options, I think, as well. Well, a final thank you. I'm going to close out right now. A final thank you to everybody who's been watching and participating and asking such great questions today. If you've missed any of today's discussions, don't worry. We've been recording it all. And so you'll be able to go back, and this will be emailed to you in the next couple of days. In closing, I really would love to thank our participants today, Matt Evertson from Swinburne University, Mike Drinkle from CAE, Matthew Gray from Qantas and from Swinburne University, and John Frierson from CASA. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for all your time and great insights this afternoon. I think the future is incredibly bright for the field, and we do look forward to seeing you in Swinburne as our new graduates, as our new students next year. And if you have any other questions, please do keep asking those questions and continue to stay in touch with us. Have a fantastic evening, and we'll see you all soon.